Hey, somebody needs to watch Captain Kangaroo. You have? Excellent. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. You are listening to The Professional Noticer. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Andrews. Hey, thank you for making me a part of your week. My purpose here today and with every show we do is to play the part of a best friend or a coach. I want to help you live the life of your wildest dreams by giving you access to the greatest mentors the world has to offer today. This week, The Professional Noticer is sponsored by wisdomharbor.com. Today, families and school systems all over America are finding wisdomharbor.com's one-of-a-kind streaming service to be the perfect, low-cost, high-quality educational tool for their students. Wisdom Harbor's stated responsibility is to create the next greatest generation, starting with your hometown and your school system. For less than $3 a month per teacher, classrooms have access to original content only found on wisdomharbor.com that teaches, entertains, and builds character in young people while creating conversations between young people and the adults in their community. Utilizing video, audio, and the written word, content is delivered in small bites by Grammy winners, CEOs, comedians, chefs, best-selling authors, and Hall of Fame speakers. There are even guitar lessons from an award-winning songwriter. Check it out today and join your friends and neighbors who are already a part of wisdomharbor.com. And isn't it time your schools got involved? wisdomharbor.com, creating America's next greatest generation, starting with your hometown. Observations and answers, that's what we do here on The Professional Noticer. And we love it when somebody comes to the table with both. We think we have both today, observations and some answers for you. We are starting today with a new series that will be intermittent. We'll throw episodes in between our regular broadcast episodes, and it's going to be on raising great adults. So let's get started. This is going to be different from anything you might expect. I don't know what you expect, but this won't be it. And we're going to be approaching this from a very organic way. I think you'll like. So what is parenting? Is it love, control, peace and quiet, training, survival, protection, perfection? Is there a way to know if you're on track? I mean, are you parenting correctly and effectively, or is parenting just a shot in the dark, a best guess? There must be answers, but they seem to be rare and hard to find. How will we be remembered as parents? The answer to that question, of course, is completely in our hands. I'm a dad, and you and I are probably a lot alike. I haven't earned a PhD in parenting, but for more than 20 years, I was able to practice the parenting thing every single day. Now, I've been called America's noticer. I might be the only professional noticer you've ever met. What is a noticer? Well, when the exciting talents were being passed out, I didn't get any of the cool ones. I can't run fast or sing great, but I notice little things that can make a difference in the lives of other people. So this noticing thing I have might be where I can provide some value for you as a mom or a dad or a grandparent, or as an uncle or an aunt, or as the friend of someone who is a mom or a dad. If you're a parent or about to be, then I think you'll want to keep listening, because you and I are about to notice some things together. We're going to get some answers, and these will be answers to some very important questions. During this series, we'll clearly title these episodes as they're slipped into our regular lineup, so you won't miss one if this is what you're wanting to hear. So here's my overarching parenting principle. We're not trying to raise great kids. We are raising kids who become great adults. You know, as I've worked with parents, I've heard so many parents say to me, talk to me about problems with their children, and I would say, well, what is your parenting strategy? And they said, we're determined to raise great kids. This is, we promised God that if we had kids, they would be our priority. So we think about them every morning. We pray for them every night. We think about them all day long, and we're determined we're going to raise great kids. And I want to say sometimes, well, that might be your problem, because we're not in the business of raising great kids. We want to raise kids who become great adults. You got to remember, you can make them be great kids because you're bigger than they are and you have all the money. We can make them be great kids. But what we're really concerned is their thinking when they get away from us. And so, mothers and fathers ask me sometimes, they say, how can I know if I'm doing a good job parenting my children? And there's an amazing amount of fear in that question. I understand it. I had it. Doubt and fear coming from a parent who's pulled in all directions, maybe needs some reassurance that they're not screwing up what they know is a very important job. And the answer has to do with the understanding and adherence of principle. This is coming from my own deep desire to succeed as a parent. When we had our first child, Austin, I was terrified. I didn't feel at all prepared to guide a life, and looking around at other parents and the children they were raising, the results just seemed all over the map. In fact, it didn't seem to matter what books those parents read or what TV shows they watched. Years ago, one of the things I learned to do with teams and businesses was to devise processes or methods according to the results they wanted to get. And so if we were going to choose the results we were after, then why not determine what was possible, right? I talk to businesses and teams about the best. Well, as a young dad, I would read this book or see this process, and it would say, according to experts, 67% of so-and-so are doing this, and, according to this, 84% of children succeed if they're, and, I'm looking at all these statistics, and, after Adam, we were like, hey, we only got 2 kids. I can't have 67% success. I got to have 100%. But that wasn't what I was seeing. It didn't matter what color people were, what socioeconomic background. It didn't matter whether they were Christians or Jews or atheists or Muslims. It seemed like just the results were all over the map. So I thought, rather than going for some kind of program or book that has this kind of parenting and carrot parenting, and they would devise the thing around the growing of a carrot, or it was all these kind of gentle parenting, and there's so many different kinds. But my point was that at that point in my life, I didn't know where to go, but I started looking at, if I'm going to build my own process, then I want to build it around the best. So exactly what was the best? Knowing that we wanted to raise a child who would become a great adult, and having read hundreds of biographies by that time, I began to search for the best results that had ever been achieved by a life in the history of the world. Now, that's excluding Jesus, but his parent, is God. So, but other than that, what was the best somebody had ever managed to pull off? Then I remembered a movie I saw in high school. It wasn't a blockbuster. It was kind of a B movie, Saturday afternoon kind of thing. But it was really interesting to me. This was before Indiana Jones, but the lead character was an Indiana Jones kind of guy. And the movie was called King Solomon's Mines. It starred Richard Chamberlain. And he went on to do the Thornbirds. You remember that? But Richard Chamberlain was the Indiana Jones guy. And the whole thing intrigued me because it was based on historical fact. I knew that King Solomon had been a real person. He actually existed. He was known as the wisest person who ever lived, and also known as the wealthiest person who ever lived. Even now, there are historians who will tell you that to this day, King Solomon's the wealthiest person who ever lived. Scholars of ancient texts will also tell you he was the wisest person who ever lived. So I thought, okay, the wisest and the wealthiest in history, that's got to be the best anybody's ever pulled off. Curiously, now, because Solomon was a king, everything he wrote has been preserved. It's still available. I mean, you and me, if we write something, we say something, nobody really cares. But a king, if a king, like you can bet if King Henry ate with a certain fork, it's in a museum somewhere. And people point to it and say, King Henry ate with that. He ate with that. And so anything they said, somebody wrote it down. Anything a king wrote was saved. And so same with King Solomon. I've read everything I could get my hands on because I thought, man, if his thoughts and decisions were, I think stuff out when I'm writing it. And so if he did that, I want to see this stuff. And so I have pored over this material for years. And amazingly, from the wisest and wealthiest person in history, there are instructions about everything. I mean, how to build a business, how to, what to do with your money, financial responsibility, raising kids, leadership skills, integrity, work ethic, and other things like how to discipline a child, when to discipline a child, why you discipline a child. Quite often now, I share the answers I've found with other parents just in conversations, and these amazing principles are based on results that most people agree were the best that ever attained. But there is more. I mean, during this time, this is just kind of interesting. During this time, it occurred to me sometime during this search that somebody parented Solomon. And I found out that his father was also a king, King David. Richard Gere, he was King David in the movie, all right? Anyway, because David was a king, what he wrote has been preserved as well. And so I read everything I could find that King David wrote. But then something began to bother me because as I was reading what King David wrote, I began to see this guy is a mess. I mean, sometimes he was happy, sometimes he was depressed, sometimes he did the right thing, sometimes he did the wrong thing. It seemed like King David wanted to do good, but just when he was on the right track, he would veer his life into a ditch. And that bothered me. But then I thought, well, sometimes I'm a mess. Sometimes I'm happy and sometimes I'm depressed. Sometimes I do the right thing, sometimes I do the wrong thing. And so then instead of being bothered by it, I was actually kind of encouraged. I thought, hey, if somebody who's as big a mess as King David can parent a child who turns out to be a King Solomon, then there's huge hope for me. And I'm assuming for you. And all we have to do is to understand and apply the wisdom of the principles that created the best result the world has ever known. When he wrote this stuff, it is curious to me because when you read the stuff King Solomon wrote, he's a king. He's not a writer. And so it doesn't have transitions. It's not in a story form. It's just like, do this and this. If you do this, this will happen. And if you do this, that'll happen. And don't do this because of this. And it's just kind of lists of stuff that covered everything. And so I'm naturally I'm a bit skeptical and not cynical, but I'm skeptical. And I thought I mean, I knew the fact about him being the wealthiest and the wisest, and so this seemed to be wisdom. But how did this work? I mean, he's just putting this stuff out there, writing this for the people in his nation, and I thought, how would I know to believe this now? How would I know to put any value on this? And I realized that, doing the research, King David was a conqueror. I mean, everywhere he lived was kind of like an armed camp. But when King Solomon came along, there was peace. And so with King Solomon, I thought, how did he get so rich? How did we go in one generation from King David living in an armed camp to King Solomon? It just didn't make sense to me. But then I began to realize, how do kings make money? One is inheritance. Okay, well, that obviously, he inherited the crown from his dad, but not a lot of stuff, some land. And I thought, well, I guess taxes. People paying taxes to the king. That would be. And then you're reading this stuff, and there were nations coming to join. People wanted to join this nation that King Solomon was ruling over. And so I was like, okay, why do people want to come inside and say, yeah, I'll pay taxes? And the reason has got to be that what he was saying worked. And you think, on Solomon's side, why would he do that? How would he generate more taxes? And if you look at the basis of a lot of his writing, a lot of it's based on money and family. And so telling people how to have the greatest family life, how to raise kids, how to have a good marriage, how to choose a spouse. I mean, all that's in there. And so I guess he would know that the better somebody's business is, the more taxes they'll pay. And the better their family life is, the better their business is. Does that make sense? And so you can't separate the professional from the personal. And so he knew that having these people happy and productive was a process of making their lives better, coaching them. He's coaching these people in their lives and coaching everybody, not just the executives, right? So we're going to begin this series, beginning today, with an explanation of 2 sentences. And this will be the explanation for today. King Solomon wrote, one of the things I found he wrote, discipline your children while they are young and there is hope. Otherwise, you will ruin their lives. Okay, so there's the 2 sentences I want to dissect for you. Discipline your children while they are young and there is hope. Otherwise, you will ruin their lives. Now, on the surface of it, what does that say? On the surface of it, it says, better discipline those kids. And I think that's pretty much it. If other people have read that in our modern times, if anybody has read some of the same stuff I've read, I think people read that and read over it and go, okay, yeah, we got to discipline those kids. That's what Solomon said, discipline those kids. But there's more to this, and there's an explanation. And I think this explanation is a good one. And I think that as we go through this series, we'll find what he says and we'll dig into it and find out, is this a principle? Does this work every time? does this make sense? Or is it a fad? Is it something that maybe it worked then, but it doesn't work now? And so I've done a lot of thinking about this. And here's the one thing that I noticed about it. It says, discipline your children while they're young, while there is hope. Okay, so I want you to think with me about how a lot of children are disciplined, about how the parent and the child, how the discipline force goes. A lot of times it seems like today when kids are 2 or 3 and they're loud and disruptive, that, the parents kind of make excuses to everybody. So, well, he's just a child, he's just a baby. And, hey, can I have some crackers over here? He's just a baby. I'm sorry. In a restaurant or on an airplane, and the kid's just causing chaos. And well, he's just a baby. And then if somebody says something, he's just a baby. Weren't you ever a baby? Did you ever have a baby? And people are really defensive about it. And what they're really saying to themselves is, that's just the way it is. He's just a baby. There's nothing I can do. He's just a baby. Okay, but Solomon says, discipline your children while they're young and there is hope. Okay, so what happens after that particular process about the 2 and 3-year-old and he's just a baby? Well, the kid turns 5 or 6 and then has a meltdown in the store, and mom or dad get down and say, don't you act like this. A 6-year-old doesn't act like this. You're 6. And the kid's thinking, it's been okay until now. What's special about 6? So then the child turns a little older. And obviously between 2 and 3 and 6, that parent's tightening up. So then the child turns 13 and all the parents' friends are saying, okay, here you go, got a teenager. Good luck. Fixing to get fun for you. Better get ready for it. Better tighten up. And so the parents do. They talk about it and they go, he's got a lot more freedom here. And so they make a speech and they say, hey, you're heading into the young adult portion of your life. And so we're going to, it's time to be a little stricter on some of the things. You're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and you will do this. And so there is a tightening up. Now, the child's 13. And so in that child's mind, I don't need all this. And so, but if they're cool, they put up with it a little bit, but there's some friction going on because mom and dad are hammering down a little more than they ever have. Now the child turns 15 and you're about to get your driver's license. Now, I don't know if we can trust you with a car. If you're going to be like this, so I'm just telling you, if you're going to get your driver's license, if you expect to get the keys to a car, we're going to tighten up here. Okay, so the kid does, because the kid's smart. And mom and dad are saying things like, as long as you live in my house, and, Junior's not saying anything, but he's thinking, I won't always be in your house. And then comes the year before senior year, and mom and dad realize they got 1 year, and they're going to tighten up. And then it comes the time that the kid is about to leave for college, and mom and dad are back in the bedroom, and mom says, can we just be happy tonight? Can we just get along tonight? He's leaving tomorrow. Can we just not argue tonight? And then the child goes away, and, when it comes back at Christmas, then the child says, hey, I'm fixing to go do so-and-so. And dad goes, I don't think you know. And the son goes, oh, you said as long as I'm in your house. I'm not in your house anymore. And I'm visiting, but I can leave if you want me to. I can leave. And then mom and dad are thinking, well, that isn't what we meant. And then most families end up just, they get along well enough that, the kids get married and have kids, and so they get along well enough that they see their kids and their grandkids on holidays and a few times during the year, but not really a strong relationship. Okay, now let's go back. Remember what Solomon said? He said, discipline your children while they're young and there is hope. Otherwise, you will ruin their lives. Now, a real critical part in here to me is that second sentence. Otherwise, you will ruin their lives, right? He doesn't say discipline your child while he is young and there is hope. Otherwise, his life will be ruined. He doesn't say his life will be ruined. He says you will ruin his life. So how's that happen? Okay, well, let's look at the opposite. Let's look at what Solomon prescribes. Let's look at that same 2 and 3-year-old pitching a temper tantrum or whatever, and go through it like Solomon says to go through it. What Solomon says is when your child is 2 and 3, that's the time to make sure they mind. Now, are they going to understand why they're minding? No, they're not. They're 2. Okay? But your job, our job as parents, is to discipline that child while they are young and there's hope, teaching them that when I say no, it means no. If I say stop, that means stop now. See, why would you really press in on that? Okay? Well, Solomon says otherwise you'll ruin their lives. You and I can think of some examples that if they were undisciplined and didn't stop when you said stop, they could lose their lives. They could be killed. I mean, we all know there's coming a time with a child, unless you're right there on them all the time, that a ball is going to be bouncing to the street, and they're going to be chasing that ball. And you got to be able to say, stop, and know that they will. Because with a ball bouncing to the street and the kid chasing the ball, you can't say, I said stop, I'm going to count. 1, you better stop now. 2. You got to be able to say stop and know they will. Not because you're a control freak, but to save their life. I mean, every kid's going to be headed toward a light socket with a wad of keys in his hand. Every kid's going to be heading toward the stove and boiling water or oil. We got to be able to, the very first, while they're young, say stop and know they will. Now, here's the curious thing that happens. That ball bouncing toward the street, and you tell that 3-year-old, stop. And he stops. That ball keeps bouncing on. Now, this kid is looking at that ball, and he still wants that ball. But he has stopped because he knows if I don't stop, she's going to get me. And so he stops, and he's watching that ball going. But here's the first inkling, the first subconscious inkling that this child has, that he can make himself do something he doesn't want to do to get a result he does want to have. He can make himself stop running after that ball to get the result of not being punished. So that is the beginning of self-discipline. That's the beginning of we discipline so that they learn self-discipline. Because then when the child turns 5 or 6 and, grabs some matches and goes to play with them, you say, no, hang on just a second. What are you doing with those? And we're going to play with them. Okay, so help me think here. Is this a good idea? A lot of times children play with matches and they burn down the house, and people get really hurt badly playing with matches. So do you think this is a good idea? No, it's not a good idea. That's very wise. You're right. That's not a good idea. That's why we don't play with matches. We don't ever play with matches. And you're able to without barking at them, help them learn how to think. Now, by the time they get 13, you should have been able to back off a great deal, because you're just watching. You're there, and you're watching how that self-discipline works. You're watching how their decisions go. You're able to say, hey, I want the best for you because I love you. Well, I'm not always right. And I'm your mama or I'm your daddy, so I'm older and wiser, so I'm probably right more often, so I'm going to have the bottom line. But I'll tell you this, if you disagree with what I'm saying, we're not going to yell about it or anything, but just ask me for clarification. And we'll talk. But we're going to talk until I agree with you or you agree with me. Because we're wanting the best. And the best is one thing. We're not talking about some of the best or the best of the decade. We're talking about the best. It's one thing. It's like the truth. So then the child turns 16, 17, and they might not even have to have a curfew. We know children that they never had to have a curfew. They never stayed out past the time that they and their parents kind of thought they should be back. And obviously, the parents have been able to pull back a lot, and there's not that head-butting. They're still in high school, they're still at home, you still got the safety net. But then when they get away from you, you have affected their thinking. You've not taught them what to think, you've taught them how to think with long conversations. It's the only way to do it, is to explore, examine. What about this? What about this? And when these principles are understood and people are able to get on board with it from both sides, good things happen. Now, Solomon said, again, discipline your children while they're young, otherwise you will ruin their lives. Okay, so how will you ruin their lives? By not disciplining them, which led to a lack of self-discipline. And I'll tell you something, an 18 or 19-year-old or a 25 or a 30 or a 40-year-old without discipline, their life is ruined. If there is somebody you see as an adult and they have no self-discipline, their life is ruined. People with no self-discipline, they don't know why they're not hired. They don't know why they're always the first to get laid off. They don't know why everybody's picking on them. They don't know why the cops always stop them. I mean, there is a lack of hope that has gone from them, and you can track what they have become to how they were raised. Now, as we get into some more of these, I know that some of you are going, well, my kid's 15 now. How are you going to help me? We're going to get to that. But that's enough for today. King Solomon, in other words, okay? I'm Andy Andrews, the professional noticer, harnessing common sense and wisdom to plow through challenges all the way to an answer for you. And I think that'll do it for this week. Get us out of here, Matthew. So, ladies and gentlemen, and to the boys and girls who aspire to become ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of another episode of The Professional Noticer. In a world where common sense has become a superpower, I'm harnessing the tiny bit of mental energy I have for you, seeking wisdom, making observations, and endeavoring to answer tough questions in a way that will empower your family and your business. I'm Andy Andrews. Until next week, goodbye. This episode of The Professional Noticer was produced by Matt Lempert. The Noticer theme written and performed by Sugarcane Jane. Plastic fly swatters for the cast and crew provided by Twinkle and Smoke of Beverly Hills. Additional financial consideration provided by historicalrevisions.org. Friend, are you offended by something that happened in the past? Does it bother you day and night? Now there's hope. Historicalrevisions.org is a strong association of like-minded people raising hell and money to eliminate all traces of what has you so bent out of shape. And it can be done. Research has shown that in America, it takes less than 5% of the population, if they're loud enough and have enough money, to wipe history clean. You don't like the Romans? We'll have them taken out of textbooks. Heck, that's too much to learn anyway. Still mad about Vietnam? Relax. It never happened. Historicalrevisions.org believes strongly that our generation should not be forced to learn the same lessons already learned by past generations. Why shouldn't we be able to start with a clean slate? So become a member, start paying dues, and have an emotional breakdown today. Major newspapers and several television networks have already joined. That's historicalrevisions.org.